And we are live on YouTube.
All right. Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday, April 16th, House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee, and we are continuing our conversation about residential and commercial building energy standards, H181. I'm Rep. Kathleen James from Manchester.
Richard Bailey, Lamar 2.
Chris Morrow, Windsor, Bennington.
South North Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klutner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
West William 2.
Scott Campbell. Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury is with us here online.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Great. Joining us in the room.
Hi, Peter Tucker with the Vermont Association of Realtors.
Great.
Nick Adams with Acton Circles.
All righty. For the record, thank you for coming.
Yes, Richard Fazy, principal at Energy Futures Group, based in Heinsberg, Vermont.
Great.
And Zach Tyler, managing consultant at Energy Futures Group.
Awesome. All right. I think we all have your testimony.
Yeah, so we thought we would walk through. Representative Campbell asked us to provide some background for H181. So
Great.
we wanted to provide, there's been some activity for a couple of years in the state, well, more than that, but there've been some working groups that Scott had asked us to review from the last few years. And then we're currently operating a Department of Energy grant too. I know that came up yesterday at your hearing. And then we've got some response to some of the questions around 181 that Representative Campbell had asked us to address. So Zach and I will be trading off here. I'll start, and feel free, whatever your format works. If you've got questions, happy to take those along the way. Hopefully
Great.
we'll have some time at the end as well too.
We will. We've got an hour. So we move back our next witness since we're running late with you. So we usually ask questions along the way, but if you think we're running dangerously behind, tell me.
Well, or tell us too, because we've got more, there's more detail in here than we're going to go through. We want to we want you to have it for the record. So,
Okay.
So we're not going to go through it all, but it's there if it's helpful.
Great. All righty. Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to provide a little bit of context in terms of laying out where energy codes are in the state and why we're even talking about this. Want to go over the two working groups. One was called Study Committee. Last year it was called a working group that have happened the last 2 years. Act 47 was 2023. The Act 151 Building Energy Codes Working Group was last year, 2024. We received a US DOE grant last year that we're working under right now. We'll give a little bit of update on that. And then, as I mentioned, some questions and answers on H181. So I'm gonna dive right in. I've got a couple slides that sort of lay out the context here that we thought was useful for laying out why this is even an issue. So there are a lot of numbers on here, but basically there are two lines to focus on. So let's focus on the orange one first, which has the axis on the y-axis on the right side. It's energy use intensity, which basically says over time, since the energy code went into effect in 1997, we've had 5 updates of that code. So 2005, 2011, 2015, 2020, and then last year, 2023, which actually was changed to 2024. The residential building energy standards, or RBs, as you talked about last year. So as you would expect, the energy code ramps up. And so the energy use goes down. It's a little confusing, but the energy efficiency improves over time, or the energy use per home goes down. At the same time, the state does every couple of years does a market assessment study. They go out and they look at the new homes that are built and determine how they're complying against the code, the statewide mandatory code that we have. And you can see that while it went up to 74% of homes complied with code in 2025, the last 2 studies have dropped. And so we've got about the last study indicates 54% compliance with our mandatory code. So the point here is that as codes are getting better, compliance is declining. And so the question is, how do we address that?
Since there a new study coming, that was 10 years ago.
There is a study planned by the Department of Public Service that will be happening over the next couple of years. Yes.
But just to clarify, on this chart, it would likely be the 2015 is when the homes were built. They're actually studied in 2020-ish. So there's a lag between when the homes were built and when they're studied. So the next update would be probably somewhere between like 2020 and 2023 on this figure. It wouldn't be 2025.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
So that the red lines, it is a little confusing. That it's essentially energy efficiency.
That's right.
going up. Okay.
Efficiency is going up. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Through these working group meetings, there's been a lot of discussion about this term authority having jurisdiction, AHJ, which came up yesterday. But basically the concept here is that there's nobody in charge of the energy codes in the state. In other states, there's typically a statewide building division or a single authority that has authority over all single family homes. That includes building codes, energy codes, contractor training. But in Vermont, it's sort of split out. And we've got the Division of Fire Safety that has authority over public buildings, which doesn't include single family owner occupied. It would include multifamily buildings and commercial buildings, but most of the homes that get built are single family owner occupied. They do have jurisdiction over all the commercial side of things, but our focus here is really on primarily on residential because that's where we're lacking on code. The previous slide I didn't mention down at the bottom right hand corner, the commercial building energy standards is at 87%. So we're doing pretty well on the commercial side. We've got architects and engineers that are addressing it. So our focus is really on residential and within the residential, primarily on single family owner occupied is where the challenges we have as a state. So the Department of Public Safety has some partial authority over codes but there is no authority over contractor training or no single residential building. There's no statewide residential code as well too. So there are a number of pieces, and part of the discussion that these working groups have had is how do we address this? And part of H181 is to continue that conversation and try to work collaboratively to figure out how this can come together. So there is some statewide authority having jurisdiction. The last sort of context setting slide, there's a lot here, but I think the main point is if you look across the rows, the top one is energy codes. And then there's a building code at the bottom. For the most part, the Division of Fire Safety has responsibility for commercial buildings, multifamily over 3 stories, up to 3 stories, townhouses, rental properties. But really what's circled in red is where there is no jurisdiction over owner occupied single family homes. So there's a little bit of oversight on plumbing, but in terms of the Division of Fire Safety having authority over it, that doesn't exist right now. And there's concerns about budget and expanding scope and some other issues that are legitimate. And so part of 181 is to, as I mentioned, is to continue this conversation and try to figure this out. So with that as context, wanted to I'll walk through the Act 47 Building Energy Study Committee of 2023. Actually, it's quite refreshing to look back at this and realize that we've actually made good progress based on the work that came out of that. And I'll just hit on some of those. And then Zach will talk about the Act 181 working group from last year. So there was good representation from stakeholders, including within government. Without all the housing organizations were represented on the committee that worked on this over the course of the summer study. There are 3 charges that were asked of the committee. This reoccurring theme will be how do building energy codes interact with fire and safety building codes. The second one was to consider and recommend strategies to increase awareness and compliance with these energy codes, and incorporating or considering the authority having jurisdiction question for administration, interpretation, and enforcement. So a reoccurring theme. And then sort of a third element of that was to look at the cost effectiveness of the code. So how do we determine whether what makes sense to incorporate in the codes as they're updated each year? What are the cost effectiveness criteria that are used? On the charge one, on the integration of building and energy codes, the findings were that the committee really identified a couple issues that are impeding progress with the energy codes. One is that, as I previously mentioned, no state agency has comprehensive administrative authority over the energy codes, and in the absence of a residential code, that there's no regulatory infrastructure which to base the energy code administration. So the state has elements of a residential code, but we don't have an updated statewide building code in which the energy code in other states, it usually lives. It's usually there's a plumbing, electrical, general construction codes, and energy code is typically part of that. In Vermont, we have this sort of orphan energy code that's out there without a larger structure in which it lives.
We probably heard that in testimony, and I've forgotten. How did that happen?
Well,
How did we
actually,
come to have an energy code, but not an overarching building code?
I think Vermont historically has been a libertarian state and hasn't wanted people to tell how buildings should be built, and so that's always sort of been an undercurrent. But in 1997, who was the governor in 1997?
Douglas?
Oh, maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know. But there was a
Dean.
governor's committee. Dean, is that what? I don't know. But there was governor's committee that established a working group that came up with the energy codes. And so in 1997, there was the residential building energy, the RBs and the residential, and 10 years later, the CBs went into effect. But
the legislature must have.
the legislature, it's
Yeah.
legislatively required, yes. The legislature did that.
Okay, so there was some momentum around this one particular piece of it at that time.
Yes.
Okay.
And just want to note that while the working group, I had the names up there on the list, there was general consensus around trying to establish a statewide authority having jurisdiction, but at the same time, there were a number of dissenting commenters that were part of the working group. So the Division of Fire Safety, Department of Public Service, Association of General Contractors did not support that recommendation. And there are concerns about staff, expertise, budget around some of these issues. So this is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. Rector.
Could you remind me, is it the Attorney General, like where do complaints go around housing index?
Around energy or housing. Well,
Housing, I'm
I think
thinking
Attorney General, I don't know. I don't know exactly, but I do believe because there is, as part of one of these working groups, we did track housing or building science related complaints. And I think that was the Attorney General's office that has a consumer complaint line.
So, one sec. So, Peter, as we go along, you guys will definitely have a chance to come in and testify as we move forward. I just want to make sure that they have time to get through their presentation. Did you have a quick thing or?
Yeah. Quick, in the Vermont Association of Realtors also were in the dissent on this.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, and yeah, you guys will, as we continue our conversations on this, we'll be getting everybody in the room. Okay, great. Thank you.
So I'm not going to walk through all this, but I am going to hit on the sort of the high level recommendations that came out of that. And so the charge one was about the authority having jurisdiction under this working group. The second charge was about increasing awareness and compliance with the energy codes. And so there were 5 or 6 sort of general categories, making structural, statutory, policy, and programmatic changes, Vermont's energy code environment. So no, this again, this is the discussion about the AHJ was included as part of this as well. The legislature last year actually did update the code that you talked about this yesterday, I believe, and changed shall to may in terms of updating it every 3 years. It used to say the state shall update it within 3 years after the national code went into effect, and that was changed to may with concerns that it might not be appropriate. As the code is getting more stringent, it may not be appropriate to do it as frequently. So that is now an option. It's left open to the legislature. And then there are a number of other, we're working with the Office of Professional Regulation and some other things as well too, which we are actually doing as part of our Department of Energy grant as well too. So many of these recommendations have actually been put into place and are moving forward. So it's good progress that action was taken from this. The second main category was to improve the process for filing and tracking energy code certificates. And so the Division of Fire Safety is updating their permit database, and we are actually in discussions with them now about expanding that to include energy code information as well. Right now it's about building permits for the buildings that is under their jurisdiction, but expanding it to include RBs and CB certificates would be beneficial. And so we are working with the Division of Fire Safety on that. There were a number of other recommendations around workforce and training, increasing awareness, developing a funding plan going forward, and coordinating code compliance grant efforts. Part of our Department of Energy grant, which we'll hit on in a little bit, is to do training and awareness, and so a lot of this is happening as well too, and including. We've got, as part of Efficiency Vermont, as part of this effort, has a couple circuit riders, people who are dedicated to help builders and developers out in the field and review plans. So a lot of the recommendations are coming to fruition as a result of some of this work. And then the last charge that we've had was to evaluate the cost effectiveness analysis, and so the committee agreed with the way that it's been done historically, but to establish a new committee in the future as well too. When the next version of the code comes around, this will be revisited, and so they'll look at the economics and how we determine whether a code update is warranted and what makes sense. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Zach, and he will bring us up to speed on last year's Act 151 working group.
Yep, thanks, Richard. So the Act 151 group really was an extension of the Act 47 effort. So the composition of the committee was similar, some new members, myself included. But again, really, I think you can think of it as an extension of the Act 47 committee. The charges are listed here. So again, common themes or some similarities between Act 47 and Act 151 in terms of what the charges were. So the three charges, the first to recommend strategies and programs to increase awareness of and compliance with the RBs and CBs. Charge number two was to develop plans and recommendations for a potential transition to a comprehensive program for RBs and CBs at the Division of Fire Safety, including considering how that might be funded. And lastly is considering whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code. Again, this relates to the issues Richard laid out, where in most other jurisdictions, the energy code is sort of a component of a broader building code. So I'll go through the Act 151 recommendations. This, by the way, is set to continue through next year. So I don't think anything has been set formally in terms of plans for this year. But anticipating this working group will continue. Charge one, these are the recommendations coming out of Act 151. So for charge one, increasing awareness and compliance, the first recommendation was to establish a role for the energy efficiency utilities to play in supporting energy code compliance. This relates to some of the language in H-181. The second recommendation is to support the Office of Professional Regulation with the rulemaking process to establish specialty certifications for residential contractors that are registered in the OPR registry. So residential contractors are required to register with the Office of Professional Regulation. And we are working with OPR to help set up a voluntary set of certifications around RVs and being trained and knowledgeable about the residential energy code. Sort of related to that is some support for OPR with website improvements in terms of navigating their site, identifying contractors, identifying what their specialty certifications might be, thinking through how that looks to consumers at the end of the day. The fourth recommendation on this charge was to work with lenders, attorneys, real estate professionals, and others to include acknowledgement of RVs in the residential real estate transaction process. Peter, you might be able to speak to this, but it seems like this is not done consistently. It may happen sometimes and not in others in terms of whether a certificate is included in part of the paperwork with real estate transactions or not. And lastly, due to the flooding in recent years, there was some discussion about what is the interaction or overlap between flood recovery efforts and energy code requirements. And so as part of that, there was a recommendation to pull floodplain administrators into RVs and CVs education and outreach efforts so they sort of understand the scope of the energy code and how it may or may not apply to flood recovery efforts. Charge 2 was to develop plans for potential transition to the Division of Fire Safety. So the first recommendation, this was a repeat from the Act 47 committee, which was to designate the Division of Fire Safety as the statewide authority having jurisdiction over all building construction, and to establish a process to transition away from a requirement that requires municipal staff to file RVs and CB certificates in town records and move that to sort of a centralized process with the Division of Fire Safety. The second recommendation, Richard sort of talked about this, alluded to this, and this is underway, which is incorporating RVs and CB certificates into an update to the Division of Fire Safety record management system. The third recommendation was to ensure that as part of that process, any data related to RVs and CBs energy code certificates is sort of accessible and analyzable by the public so that we can learn things like how many new homes have heat pumps, what's the primary heating fuel type, what are the insulation values. So that's the goal of getting these. One of the goals of including these in the DFS system is to allow accessibility and answer some pressing questions that the state has. And the fourth recommendation is to create a comprehensive document detailing the costs and benefits associated with RVs and CBs energy code administration at DFS. So this has been partially done through our work on the DOE grant. We have looked at what the permit costs would be, what those permit increases would be. Mr. DeRocher from Division of Fire Safety presented on what the costs would be for public buildings, and then we sort of took that information and estimated what permit costs may be on the single family side, were that an approach that were used to fund energy code administration. What hasn't been done is the incorporation of the benefits of energy code compliance. So there's work to be done there in terms of operational cost savings, non-energy benefits, comfort, health and safety, etc. Again, there were dissenting comments that these are primarily focused on the recommendation that the Division of Fire Safety be named as the AHJ. So I wanted to make sure that those were listed here. So DFS has lengthy comments in the report that's available, but essentially lack of capacity to extend their current authority is a real concern. their primary focus is on life and, health and safety issues and not energy code issues. And they believe we should be focused on training and education, not regulation. The PSD sort of echoed those comments and also noted that a study has not been completed detailing what the impacts, costs, and benefits, again, of a statewide building code may be. And the Association of General Contractors dissented as well with concerns about the costs associated with residential building energy standard enforcement. The last charge was considering the adoption of a building code, and the Division of Fire Safety has started a working group to look at the questions around adopting the IRC, that's a National Residential Building Code. I know they have met once, and the division has plans to sort of restart those meetings. I don't think that's happened yet, but I know it's on the to-do list.
IRC is International Residential Code.
Do you want me to cover this? Do you want to do that?
I can do this.
Sure.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we are the fortunate recipients of the Department of Energy grant. We're nearing the halfway part. We're not sure if we're going to be funded for the last half of what has been obligated, but so the future is uncertain at this point in time. But we have done a lot of work for the first half of the grant. We've got a great team. It's $1 million that we received on behalf of the state of Vermont. The state agencies weren't able to lead that, so we stepped up along in partnership with the Secretary of State's office. We needed a state agency to be a partner on this. And so we're working with the International Codes Council, which is a national organization that develops all of these codes that the state then references and adopts for our local usage. Our 3 efficiency utilities, that's Burlington Electric Department, Efficiency Vermont, and Vermont Gas Systems are part of the team. And then also the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies are linked to all the municipalities in the state as well too. So under the Vermont Secretary of State's office is the Office of Professional Regulation, and so they've come up a number of times. So they've got this builder certification process, and we're working with them, as Zach mentioned, to develop a voluntary builder certification for knowledge about the energy codes as part of that, and they're our lead. So part of our charge in this project is really to develop an energy code administration plan for Vermont, including a proposed funding mechanism, and lay the groundwork for future implementation of code mechanism, ultimately resulting in significant sustained reductions in energy use. Really, the goal is to increase compliance. So the first point was that we're at 54% compliance. At best, some would say we're actually not even at that level. But how can we take all of these resources and pieces we have and bring them together and make this a more effective application of our energy code work going forward to increase that compliance rate? So we have a number of tasks that we've been working on. We're hoping that we receive the funding for the second half of the grant starting in June, because we've developed these 10 trainings with Efficiency Vermont. We started to roll them out. We've got plans for training hundreds of builders over the next couple of years, and which we can't do without funding. So we're hopeful. Our fingers are crossed. But really, the main focus of this is training and support of builders, design professionals, trade associations, and other stakeholders. We mentioned we've put in place, we've identified, trained, and hired through Efficiency Vermont 2 circuit riders, one for Northern Vermont and one for Southern Vermont, whose job it really is to interact in the field, work with builders, problem solve, bring out a blower door, and resolve issues on the building site if somebody's having problems, or code interpretation. Really trying to get information out. A lot of this is about technical assistance and training. We've been doing a lot of work with VAPTA, the municipal outreach, a number of webinars and training of town officials, committees, and others through that effort. We also we have a vision that we've been really working on that would try to thread the needle between putting boots on the ground that would support code compliance without increasing the size of government and or the cost of this. So Vermont's got about 100 energy professionals. We're sort of calling them generically. We've got trained people that are home energy rating professionals, Building Performance Institute. We heard Jeff talk about the trainings that they do. That's all of these people have extensive training in how to look at buildings, building science, how to use our performance testing tools, blower door, duct blaster, how buildings go together that have the potential to serve as a market-based resource for helping the construction industry comply with code. And if we can put in place a way that brings them into the construction process, allows them to sign off on RB's certificates and comply with the codes without having with minimizing the amount of sort of state oversight, but having a partnership. There's some great potential there. Other states have done this, sort of brought in the private sector, woven it into the public sector, and really had Massachusetts, for instance, has a robust code effort that we're sort of looking at as one of those models. So we've been working with these energy professionals in Vermont to try to put together a process and the pieces that would enable us to make some progress here. We've been working with an advisory committee, and all of this sort of rolls into a energy code administration plan, which we've developed. We have a draft of it that's out to DOE. They unfortunately have not been very responsive. They're historic up until January. They review our materials and engage with us. We haven't really heard much of anything from them. So we're not sure where this is all going to go, but we feel like we've done some good work in setting the pieces up for some advance going forward. And so with that, we did have Representative Campbell did ask us to address a couple questions that are part of the elements of H181. So I can just keep going right into that. I don't see any.
Great. Does anybody have questions on the material so far? Yeah, Rep. Kleppner.
I do. So I can sort of imagine there being a Department of Building Safety someday that has fire safety and energy efficiency and all the other pieces of inspection of residential construction and standards we're talking about. And the goal of all that is to ensure that new construction is following best practices for safety and efficiency and health and all that. Do we have a sense for how much new construction right now is substandard in some meaningful way?
I don't think we have that quantified. I think there's a lot of anecdotal information. There are some as part of this, the working groups. There are a number of people that were part of the working group that engage in building failures, and so they brought forward tales of people, buildings that were put together without good building science information, and I've got a picture in one of the slides coming up about a building that's 10 years old and rotting and having to replace all the sheathing, and so. But that's all anecdotal. I don't know that there has been a study. Are you aware of?
Not on the sort of building code or building quality side. We have the energy code compliance studies that allude to where we are with that. But I think what Richard's referring to is a good opportunity to point out why we're talking about both the building and energy codes, because the energy code may require something and there are building best practices to make sure you don't have failures that might come to bear if you don't sort of structure the layers of your assembly appropriately to account for moisture movement in a building. And some of that is really building code issues, not energy code issues, but they're related to some of the energy code requirements.
And that's a lot of why we're talking about these together, because they do overlap and interact. Thank you.
Okay,
We'll keep going. One of the elements of Act 181, as Zach mentioned, that Act 151 is a 2-year study. So presumably, while we haven't heard yet, but the Act 151 working group should be being picked up again this year and moving forward. But the Act 181 suggests that it keep going until there is an authority having jurisdiction named. And so, as you've heard from us, we've been trying to figure this out for a number of years and haven't arrived at resolution. I feel like we've made progress every year. I mean, I think you work with people and we've got the right people at the table, and we're understanding more of the issues and trying to work through some creative ideas get put forward. So, this is important to put somebody in charge of energy code compliance, administration, and enforcement. It's an important goal to achieve at the end of the day. That's having an AHJ avoids confusion around energy code interpretation and technical answers, and establishes a compliance mechanism for RVs. Right now, as I believe you talked about yesterday, the only recourse is for somebody to take a lawsuit against the builder, and that's quite a process even. And it happens once in a while. It doesn't happen very often, and I think that there. Did you want to add?
Well, just one point on that. For jurisdictions that do have a certificate of occupancy, they can hold those back absent an RV certificate. What doesn't exist is any oversight of what's on that certificate. It's self-certifying, so a builder can put whatever they want on the certificate. All a municipality would do is accept that certificate. There's no inspection or verification of what's actually being installed.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, and so moving forward with the working group efforts would also continue this potential future solution working with energy professionals as well too. So as a low cost market-based solution, coordinating that with the energy efficiency utilities and stakeholders, so I'm just going to hit on the role of energy professionals too, because one of the pieces of H 181 is providing the energy efficiency utilities, primarily Efficiency Vermont, but it would include Vermont Gas and Burlington Electric Department as well too, the ability to claim savings for impacting code compliance. So right now there's not a lot of incentive for spending their sort of scarce dollars on their programs on the energy code world, because there's no mechanism to claim the savings that result from higher compliance rates. And so if it gets a little wonky, but if there is the ability to measure the impact of their working with the new construction field and demonstrate that that by their training and intervention and support services, they influenced all new homes to even increase compliance by a little bit, there's a lot of savings that's associated with that. And if they can claim that as part of their annual goals, and they are sort of measure the currency that they are measured by is the energy savings. And so if new construction energy savings can become part of their offering, that would provide some incentives for them to be engaged in this process. So actually I do have a slide that gets to, I'll just jump to that. At the very end. Oh, so it gets okay, right at the end here. So and I'll jump back to the other one. So attributing savings to code compliance would really be important, because the state's the most recent comprehensive energy plan states that our goal is to achieve net zero ready construction, basically buildings that if you put solar panels on the roof, those buildings would be able to generate all of the energy that they use over the course of the year. So that's sort of the definition of net zero ready construction. Our goal is to have all our new construction meet that standard by 2030. That's not too far away. And we feel we're really not going to get there without full energy efficiency utility support. The energy efficiency utilities do a great job working in the marketplace, but we're going to need them to play a role if we're really going to meet this goal. So if they're allowed to claim savings from these activities, they'll be incentivized, and they can do so through supporting energy professionals, builder training, technical assistance. So one of the provisions in 181 is to make sure that there's the Department of Public Service and the efficiency utilities work out a mechanism to put this in place. It seems like it's this would be a big win. So the continuing the Act 151 working group would help also the discussion in that area. So I think we've talked about this. Why does Vermont need a building code for all homes? Set the standard of practice for designers and builders as a reference point. For instance, right now there's no one to point to how high should the railings be on the deck. What framing lumber should be used given a roof span. The resources that are out there, but we to ensure that there's a standard of safety, a standard for all building practices. A building code would be a good outcome. So we've mentioned that all public buildings are covered by the Department of Fire Safety, but not single family owner occupied. So there is that hole there. And this having ability to address these conflicts, as Zach just mentioned, between energy code and building codes by a single entity would be really important. And I think this gets back to the point we talked about as well too. So integrating a single home for energy and building codes makes sense because you build energy efficiency in from the start. Certainly costs a lot less to do it initially rather than weatherize later. Incorporating building science. This is a picture of a home in Essex that had a catastrophic building failure because they didn't get it right, moisture issues, and so making sure that the energy and the proper building practice are incorporated together is important. I just want to make the point too that energy codes are really provide a least cost option. It's a small incremental cost from baseline or from the previous code to the new code, but the criteria that we use, that the state uses for upgrading the codes is that the energy savings need to offset the incremental cost in year one. And I don't know that I have the time to go through this, but basically they are here. There are two tables here that have the standard code and the stretch code. The next one's stretch code. They're set up the same. The standard low cost, the first row, is sort of the basis for how the decision is made to upgrade the code. So for this particular composite home that represents the state of Vermont, the annual savings would be $83 a year. It would cost $1,800 to upgrade the code to achieve those $83 savings. That turns into a 12-year simple payback, if you look at it that way, or a return on investment of 8%. Really, the guiding determination is the cash flow column. So this says if you were to finance that $1,018 in your mortgage over 30 years at the prevailing interest rate, your mortgage would go up $72. But there's $83 a month in energy savings that offsets it and provides a $9 cash flow. So that's sort of at a minimum, the sort of basic approach pays for itself. If you take the all electric route in the code is pretty technical, it has a lot of different options. If you were to go the all electric route, you would save $785 compared to that a year. It would cost $2,900 to do that because the heat pumps are more expensive than conventional equipment. But the savings way offsets that incremental cost. You would end up with $570 a year in your pocket after paying that higher mortgage rate, mortgage payment, but offsetting that by a significant amount on all electric. Blended together is the third column, and then the next table is if you do this for stretch code, it's the same. There's still positive cash flow regardless of how you look at it. So I just want to provide a little bit of information on the economic justification for why these codes make sense. I can go into more detail here if you want, but I feel like I want to give you more time.
And just the savings there are the operational cost savings to the homeowner. So the efficiency savings for using less fossil fuels, or, they may be using increased electricity, but they're not paying for delivered fuel oil or what have you. So that's sort of the source of those savings.
Yeah, Red Miles.
Is there like a standard kind of metric for how much you save by building an efficient home initially versus what we were hearing about before, going back in and retrofitting a home for 15 grand? Is that a number that you guys work with, or is that?
Well, these costs are a decent comparison point, I suppose, right? The upfront cost of sort of building to a higher standard are much lower than that, and you're going to get more comprehensive service or energy efficiency when you're building this in from the start than trying to retrofit it in down the road when your walls are enclosed and all your systems are in place. And it's just a much more challenging process.
I mean, it's a little bit of apples and oranges though, too, because the existing homes run the gamut, but typically a new home is probably in the ballpark of half the operating costs of an average existing home. I mean, they really, our builders are doing a great job, and we've got materials and technology and efficiency of equipment is up there. So there's a noted difference. But this assumes you're building to the 2020 code and the difference with the 2024 code. But if you're going to look at the operating costs of this home relative to an existing home, that 50-year-old home or whatever, the savings would be significant. And to Zach's point, it's a lot less expensive to build it in from the start than it is to go in retrofit, as we can all know.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get a hold.
Yeah. So that was what I think. Scott, did we cover what you asked us to? Is there anything else?
I think so. And I guess I wanted to follow up on this last point too, about building the right way the first time, and not relying on retrofits. Obviously, as Zach points out, it's a lot easier to build it the first time and not have to come back and retrofit. And for example, walls are closed in and you can't add insulation very easily without thickening the walls. Also, it allows by building an energy efficient shell, you avoid having to spend more money on heating equipment. So you can downsize your heating equipment if you have a more efficient building shell. And the other point that I've made before, and it's worth making again, is that, as Richard says, builders are building better insulated, more airtight houses now. The typical standard construction is better than it was even 10 years ago. But the issue is that moisture management is a key problem. And if the assemblies, a wall assembly or a roof assembly, the layers in that assembly aren't installed correctly, then you wind up trapping moisture inside the assembly and rotting out framing members and causing mold and mildew and ultimately structural failures. That's possible. That happened in that photograph that Richard showed. So it's really important that builders become better educated. Some builders are doing a great job, but we're trying to find ways with this energy code compliance effort to raise the game of the entire construction industry so that everybody involved on the site all the trades, know how their piece fits into a building that is working as a sort of integrated energy system. And that's so the point. The point is education. The point isn't to try to figure out a way to make people do things and make people spend more money.
Yeah, Rep. Torrey and then Rep. Klepper.
This is great and timely work with our housing crisis, all the building that we hope we'll be doing. I'm just curious, with affordable housing projects that use public dollars, are there ever like funder requirements to
Yeah.
make sure that this public investment's going to be?
Yeah, they generally do a great job. In fact, they have the standards that VHFA and Vermont Housing Conservation Board and others, the public funds, they actually have energy standards that are higher than the statewide code. And so they've worked with their partners over the years, and some of these projects are 20-30% more efficient than the code levels. So they're generally doing a great job.
And they probably also are tracking.
Yeah.
They're like a data source.
Well, and in fact, they have, some of them have, I know Evernorth has this proprietary tracking system. So they know how much hot water everybody's using, or, energy's using. And, so they've got some good information as well, too.
That's great.
And they're often subject to Act 250, right? So they're
Yes.
subject to the stretch code, which is part and parcel with them building to a higher standard.
I see.
Yeah. But they're probably even higher than Act 250 as well, too. They do a good job with their projects.
It's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Rep. Klepper.
So to try to get the whole picture in focus for me, we have an energy code, but we don't have great compliance. We don't have an enforcement mechanism, and we don't have kind of a comprehensive education plan for builders about how to comply with the energy code.
Yeah, we have the elements of the builder training, but we're relying on questionable DOE funding to roll it out.
Okay. And we don't have a building code. There are people who think that would improve the consistency of the quality of buildings being built to best practices for moisture control and all the other pieces. So there's the benefit, and there is concern that creating the structures to train, educate builders, and to do enforcement of a statewide building code going to be expensive.
Yeah. It could, when we've done the modeling, and if there's appetite for it, which I think in this environment is challenging, a permit structure could pay for it, which it does now. I mean, our understanding, and Mr. DeRochers from Division of Fire Safety could speak to this, and he may be a good witness, but I believe that much of their, if not all of their existing oversight is paid for through a permit process or a local arrangement with municipalities where they share some of the permit fees. So that typically that's the way that these building codes are paid for nationally, is through some sort of permit fee.
Yeah, the EEU ability to claim savings from the energy code is a potential workaround to both the training issue as far as training within, say, the Division of Fire Safety to build up energy code expertise, but really the funding component, where if you were to engage an energy professional, there is a cost associated with that service to a contractor to bring that person onto their project. But if the EEUs are incentivized, they currently offer a subsidy for those services. They could offer a higher subsidy that covers the full cost in an ideal scenario where the builder wouldn't have any incremental cost to bring the energy professional onto the project, provide the expertise necessary to comply with the code. And that would be a workaround to sort of a permit-based system, where permit fees are the mechanism through which this work would be funded.
No, if I wanted to add something too. Another, I guess, workaround is to really focus on not enforcement or penalties, but on voluntary compliance. And the sort of pathway that we've been working on for this, for some years, is through the builder registration process. So we have a mandatory builder registration now that's been in place for a few years. And while registration is mandatory, there's no credentialing involved, but there are voluntary certifications available. And this was what I was asking Jeff about earlier, and what Richard and Zach are working on through the BCAP, trying to set up certifications with OPR, the professional regulation, that will incentivize builders to obtain training and be able to post those certifications with their listing on the registry that then is accessible to the public. And the public can, when they're looking for a builder, they can look up whoever they're considering and see what certifications they have. Are they certified in, I don't know, OSHA safety practices, building code compliance, building science, what have you. And so that's the mechanism we're trying to push also as a way of getting builders to educate themselves and use it as a marketing tool. One of the critical things to this, which is another part of our committee's work, is getting the website at the Secretary of State's office at the OPR to be a consumer-oriented website. And they don't have funding for doing that right now. This is the one piece of their web presence that they haven't updated. But we really want to figure out a way to help them do that.
Is the international residential code a subset of the international building code?
Yes, it is. It's one of the they have a ICC has this family of codes, and the IRC is one of them.
What did ICC stand for?
International Codes Council. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No. I go back to Boca and Southern Building.
Yeah,
Code.
and ICC sort of stepped in and
they took over the
Right.
whole.
They
did the whole state and never purchased a copy. They didn't give them away.
No, that's their funding stream, is selling code books.
Yeah.
I guess could you give me a little more explanation between what is standard code and stretch code, and why is it on this page here, the stretch code, the all electric is only a 5-year payback versus the 10-year payback for it's just doing the standard
stretch code. We wanted to develop a sort of a minimum compliance package using fossil fuels. That was sort of the criteria for determining the stretch low cost. So that's assuming you're putting in oil. Well, nobody is putting oil in these days, but propane or gas, new construction system. But also want to provide the information to builders, because many new construction projects are moving to heat pumps, all electric. And so they're just two different compliance paths. There are hundreds of compliance paths that one could take to comply with the code. It gets pretty complicated. There's 3 different pathways and there are multiple options there. But because many new projects are asking about all electric, wanted to provide an option that was more than just the minimum base compliance path, which uses a fossil fuel approach. So I don't know if that.
I think if I may, was your question, why is the payback quicker for all electric on the stretch code versus the base code?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
And I don't know if that's related to the improvements in the shell and the stretch.
No, the
code,
shell is
or-
basically the same. Because heating with an efficient electric heat pump is less expensive than heating with fossil fuels. So the savings by moving from a propane baseline. If you build the same home, you put a propane furnace or boiler in it versus putting a heat pump in it, the operating costs are going to be significantly less with that, with electricity powering the heat pump than the more expensive propane, for instance. And so the payback will be quicker.
But your upfront costs are a lot
Yes.
more money.
They are. You can see that here.
Yeah.
Yes, you're paying more upfront. So that's the analysis is upfront versus operating costs, and how does that play out over time. And if since most people pay for a new construction project in the mortgage, this cash flow process it's one of the metrics that the Department of Public Service uses to sort of evaluate what the impact is going to be on somebody. Because most of the time you're not, while you may be putting more money down upfront, a little bit more money down, most of it's going to be rolled into the mortgage. And so if your mortgage payment goes up somewhat, the comparison is how does that compare against the energy saving, the operating costs on an annual basis? And yes, it costs more, but the electricity at 2.5 or 300% efficient, which is what heat pumps operate at, ends up being a lot less than a propane furnace at 80 or 90 or at 90 or 95% efficient. So it's
Right.
I'm just struck by these costs because compared to the overall construction price for the home, like this doesn't seem like a whole lot more.
yeah. I would say that this is analysis from the last code, so that was for 2023. So the analysis was done in the 2020. I would presume that the incremental costs are going to be more now too, given all the supply chain
And
issues and
the whole cost
the
of the
whole
home.
cost of
But
construction.
as a percentage of the cost of construction,
Yes, it's not a lot.
it just seems like such a lost opportunity to not be able to get over that hurdle.
And a lot of it is education and training. And of
the home buyer too.
of the home buyer, to just, to let them know that, yes, it might be a little bit more, but this is going to be less year over year.
Operating costs are all on you, right? The developer walks away. They don't care. But you are the one who has to keep paying these bills. And I'm just wondering how well you think we're doing educating consumers.
I don't know that there's a lot of consumer education going on out there. I think a lot of it relies on the builder and the developer
That's
and the
really
real estate agents.
Yeah,
too.
we
So
really do
Peter
rely
could probably address that more better than we could.
All right. Well, we're right on time-ish. So thank you so much for joining us. That was really interesting.
Good. Well, any questions or future, let us know. Be happy to help.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think we should just roll. Is everybody okay to just roll on? We have Will here.
Thank you.
So
That was all.
thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Will, for shifting to a little bit later. Thanks, Wendy. Sorry about that.
No problem.
All right, we don't need to reintroduce ourselves. So we'll just give you a minute to get settled, Will, and then we'll let you introduce yourself for the record.
This is Will Everly, the Director of the Weatherization and Climate Impact Programs over at Capstone Community Action. And I'll have Wendy, my illustrious colleague, introduce herself.
Gilvery. I'm the Executive Director and Director of Weatherization for NITO, the Northeast Kingdom's weatherization professionals. I'm relatively new to weatherization, but very enthusiastic about our programs.
That's well played, because we learned earlier this morning, we're just starting to learn about weatherization. I had asked whether all the funds flow through to community action agencies, and they said no, not all of them. There's NITO. So this is perfect.
Fantastic.
So, all right, take
I'll
it
give a
away.
little bit of framing before we launch into the presentation. The first thing you'll note is it is a recycled presentation previously delivered with the director of the state weatherization programs, Jeff Wilcox. So there's some adjustments throughout the day. But the thing I wanted to start with is letting you know that really what we want to do is hear from you about questions and concerns that you have. We're going to give you a flurry of information here, but the most important thing is you have the chance to really get into the weeds with anything that we might not have covered. The very first thing that I think you want to think about in context of our work is that we are trying to ameliorate incredibly deep-seated poverty in the state of Vermont. And the type of work that we do has a compounding effect for the global needs of the households and the global economy in Vermont. And so we'll get into a lot of the details throughout the presentation, but I want you to hold this image in your head of going into a home to do all of the scope of work that we do each day. That when you first drive up into that parking lot and see the home, your first thought might be, how could somebody possibly live here? This isn't a place that somebody should be living. And when we're done, it is a place that somebody is warm and comfortable and able to stay in. And so this is really about helping to ameliorate some of the deepest poverty that we see in our state. We'll get into some details shortly. That said, I'd like to really launch into the presentation with an understanding of the dimensions of wellness. So I haven't had an opportunity to read my New York Times updates for about 45 minutes. So as far as I know, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, still does exist as a federal entity that does provide guidance on the dimensions of wellness. And what they have done is to articulate a framework that really talks to all of the things that a human being needs to essentially not just be okay, but to really thrive in our society. So when we talk about weatherization, historically, we might hear about the impact on the climate, on the economy, on the labor force. Those are all very important. But really the message that I hope to take home with you is that this work that we do has an impact across all of those dimensions of wellness and rippling into the community itself. So throughout the presentation, we'll go through each of those dimensions. And up next, we have Wendy starting us off with financial wellness.
Financial wellness. So when we're looking at the impacts of weatherizing a home, we on average are able to save each household 30% of their energy costs. This can be a total of $1,015 back into the homeowner's pockets when they heat with oil. And it also significant savings on other utility and energy costs. So when their oil furnace is working better, they're less likely to use the electric heat, right? That they supplement with and those sorts of things. So that is just the dollars and cents of the savings that our clients see.
We can talk about occupational wellness. A point that I'd like to start with is if you're going to the coffee shop today and talking to a friend, or maybe just hearing somebody talk next to you in a random coffee shop anywhere in Vermont, a refrain sometimes you might hear is there aren't enough good workers out there, or people don't want to work. Those are some things that you often hear. But if you come to one of our weatherization programs at 6:45 in the morning, you're going to see a stream of people rolling in that want to work and work very hard and are very happy to be there. And when we have a job posting, we get a lot of applicants that are interested in joining this workforce. And the reasons for that are that we pay a very good livable wage. We provide really good benefits and training opportunities. And most importantly, we provide a ladder. So as we interview people to begin thinking about this work, they know that this is a home for them that will be a career for as long as they want to be there. And there's the opportunity to do ongoing training, certification, professional development, so that you can start with no skills whatsoever, entry level, gain certifications, gain additional responsibility and compensation, and get to the point of doing things like project management in the building sciences, working on, multi-million-dollar programs over the course of the career that we see in the 3D thermal program that we have on the multi-unit side of the space. That said, just the dollars and cents of it are, we have about 164 employees currently in the weatherization workforce across all of the programs in the state of Vermont, of which there are 6. There are 5 weatherization assistance programs focusing on the smaller unit homes up to 4 units. And then we have a multi-unit weatherization program called Thermal, which works on all of the larger programs, affordable housing complexes, quadplexes and up, owned either by public or private entities looking to create affordable housing on the other side of that. That said, that doesn't stop with just our workforce. We also subcontract with a network of just under 200 additional small business owners across the state of Vermont each year. And cumulatively, we're putting out over $5 million into that local economy through the local small businesses that we work in that process. And to the greatest extent possible, we're procuring and using the basic building material supply chains that it gets close to our region as possible in terms of where they're initially produced. Most of our cellulose is sited in Massachusetts and things of that nature. And I think for this particular slide, that is enough to get you grounding in that, and we'll loop back to a little bit more details a little bit later.
Well, is that 194 companies or 194 individual folks?
It's really a mix of private subcontractors and larger companies. So,
Okay.
but the number really does speak to individuals, the 194,
Yep.
of which some are bigger companies and some are smaller. Yeah, and then we'll turn it over to Wendy for environmental limits.
Yeah, so the environmental impact of the work that we've done, the CO2 prevented from entering the atmosphere annually from, this is for the 952 1 to 4 unit households weatherized in 2024, was 4,774,000 plus pounds. We're also, you've got it in front of you on your sheets, it looks like. Number 2 oil saved on average 261 gallons per household. That's 99,000 gallons by 380 households. Kerosene saved 242 gallons per household, 23,260 for the 96 households we served that were heating off of kerosene. Propane, 247 gallons. Natural gas on average 178 therms saved annually, or when we're looking at cords of wood, 1.6 per household. So that's 244 cords of wood for 152 households that were heating with wood. Tons of pellets. We averaged savings of 1.3 tons per household, or 104 for the 80 households that we serviced that were heated with pellets. And total for the state of 181,000 kilowatt hours saved in electricity from the 81 households that we serviced that heated with electricity. So every one of you should be picturing in your minds the cost per gallon, cost per ton, cost per kilowatt hour, and the savings, the total savings for the state. So this is how it breaks down for the houses that we serviced in 2024.
An image that I'd like you to hold in your head in addition to these numbers is just to think about going up to, say, the Berry Auditorium and thinking about if the fuel oil that we are not using as a result of the work that we're doing were to be physically in that building and you're to walk into it, how much would that be? Would it be knee deep? Would it be waist deep? It would be a lot. I'm working on getting you the exact inches in that thing, but just imagine literally like truck after truck after truck of fuel oil that is not utilized as a result of the work that we're doing. Similarly, you could imagine how much firewood you could put in that. It's a whole heck of a lot. Next year, hopefully we'll have an image with a ruler that will show you how high up the Berry audit actually is, but hold that in your head as well. When we talk about emotional wellness, it's a little bit shifting, from the dollars and cents and the kilowatt hours to just really thinking about the human impact of this work. And buzzwords really get thrown around. Maybe you get sick of them. Words like holistic. But I want you to think about running a holistic construction company, what that might possibly mean. So, we have 5 trucks every single day going out, 5 crews at our particular organization, Capstone Weatherization, 20 people doing this work 4 days a week, all year round. And cumulatively, we're working on about 600 units a year on the single family and then also on the multifamily when we include our 3E portfolio. So imagine about 600 homes of Vermonters every single year where it's now affordable, your money is staying in your pocket and not being used on fuel. It's comfortable. There's a very large scope to that. In that process, we run into very difficult situations where a person may have come to us for weatherization, but that's not the only thing going on with them. They have all types of other needs that could be relative to mental health, substance use disorder, hoarding, physical health conditions, poverty, lack of food access, all of these types of things. So every single time that we go to work on that home, we don't assume that the only thing they're going to need is cellulose insulation and air sealing and energy efficiency coaching. We think about everything they might need. So to ensure that we're doing that systematically and it doesn't depend on the skill or the motivation of one employee, one organization, we use a tool called One Touch, which forces us to think about each of those social determinants of health every single time. And it really starts with an energy coach going into a home and just sitting down at the kitchen table with the owner of the home and having a cup of coffee and meeting their dog and establishing a rapport and some comfort and just going through this list of the different things that might be coming up for them. We'll get around to talking about the efficiencies and what it's going to look like when the crews come and all of that. But that's the opportunity to really let people know about all the other things that are available to them. And in all cases across the entire network, we have a seamless process of referring out to other services, whether or not we hold them in-house or we have community partners doing them. We're always able to connect people to additional supports. We'll talk about some of those a little bit further in the presentation. Another thing to just consider at this moment is that there is a tremendous impact on mental health and wellness that happens in a built environment where you walk into a room of any kind and you have a feeling in that room of, is this a place where a person should be living? Is this a warm house? Is this a place that feels safe for a kid to be, or a place that feels like a decent human habitat, or not? And very often when we start that process, it is not. And when it's done, it is. So that's really why we want you to think beyond the dollars and cents of this, beyond the BTUs and the kilowatt hours, to really what that human impact looks like. That said, we're going to pass it to Wendy for a brief touch on some of the remaining dimensions of wellness.
Yeah, that was very well said, Will. And when we're looking at the dimensions of wellness from a spiritual perspective, the numerous steps in the weatherization process and multiple caring and hardworking people in the home often recharges our clients' spirits. I just happened to this week get a client feedback survey, which we get from every one of our homes, where the client said, I get oddly nervous about having people in my home, especially when they're inspecting things. And later she said, I don't think I can encompass how great they were. Every person was friendly and kind. I absolutely felt zero judgment for any aspects of my house and life. And every person was beyond respectful in a completely genuine way. It's clear the whole crew are kind, trustworthy, and hardworking people. And she took the time to, on the back of the paper to write this all out. That really, it impacted her to have people come into her home who she could trust and felt validated by. So from a social perspective, we prioritize older Vermonters who are often isolated. And the many-stepped process engages our clients to talk about their home, and we often get home-baked cookies and many conversations with clients. There used to be a part in our policy that said that we weren't allowed to accept gifts, and we did have to make an exception for nicely baked food and lunches that they just insist on giving our crews on pretty much a regular basis. Physically, we make their homes more safe, keeping them from being physically harmed by their home. When you walk into a home that's being heated primarily by an outdoor, like the ones you see in restaurants, propane tank that's not meant to be indoors, that's not safe. Those people will take priorities, and we'll get them into a safer home as soon as possible. And from an intellectual perspective as well, our efficiency coaches, as Will pointed out, will spend the time sitting at the table 2 to 4 hours, going through the home, interacting with the clients, and truly educating them about the building science, weatherization, and then any other aspects of their home that we need to improve, work on, or that we want them to focus on throughout the process. So everyone comes out of it knowing more about weatherization and feeling more in tune with their house and what it will take to make it a safer environment for them.
It's really well said. And we also have Wendy talking about the non-energy benefits of weatherization, which we'll hear about in just a moment also.
Yeah. So we're looking at the improved indoor air quality, improved combustion appliance safety, improved and reduced moisture levels, which is anyone who's ever had any water infiltration in their home knows how that can steamroll into so many other problems. Improved building durability with less mold, ice, frost in the attic, and water leaks. The improved health of the occupants and reduced medical costs that come from that. And the ability, again, for our elderly clients to stay in their home and age in place, and improved comfort in the summer as well as in the winter. Weatherization is a whole year solution, not just for the negative 30 days in Vermont.
So I spend more time than I should admit making beautiful color-coded spreadsheets and coming up with evidence-based practices. And I spend enough time in state government to rattle off bifurcation and iterative processes and interstitial systems of care where we're bringing stakeholder feedback and turning curves. And that's important, but it only gets you so far. And I want to take a moment to just really keep it 100 and tell you about the actual people that we serve and what this does in their lives. So one story that's really stuck with me from the very moment I heard it was an older woman who had been living in her old farmhouse in Vermont for many, many years and previously had a bedroom in her home that she no longer could live in because it was just impossible to keep that part of her house. So for half of the year, her actual room is just totally unavailable to her. So what she had to do was move a cot into her kitchen and open her oven and sleep in front of the oven at night to stay warm enough to be able to stay in the house at all. And when the work was done on her home, she could use her whole home again and she could go back to her own room and just have the experience of being in her own room, her own house, and what an impact that had for her, and how many years it had been until she was able to do that. One of the first jobs that I had an opportunity to do right along with when I started this position was at the end of this series of these forked roads that took you for many miles through the dirt roads outside of Orange and Corinth and in that part of central Vermont. And we ended up in this place where first there's this beautiful farmhouse and this bucolic field of cows and farm and all these other things. And you got to the very end of it and there was this little dirt road going into what really didn't look like a place that you could be living year round. It was a cabin if you were going to be generous. And we got into the home and there was a person who was also in her late 80s who had lived on that road her entire life. And she had moved into that cabin with her late husband a few years back and was able to live there when he was able to do the firewood. And that spent a tremendous amount of his time and they'd been able to make a go of it. And tragically, when he had passed, she was in this place that there was no chance she was going to be able to continue to live in anymore if she wasn't able to access this support. So what we were able to do was help her to connect to better appliances that she was able to use in a way that didn't depend on other people doing a lot of manual labor. We were able to get her home healthy and air sealed and weatherized. And when we were done with that, you walk through that door and it's cozy and it's warm. And we felt really proud of that in general. But the thing that really stuck for me was that she hadn't got a lot of visitors in the last year and she had a guest book. And everybody that came into the house, she'd have sign the guest book. And she was so happy that we were there and had us sign the guest book and sit down and talk to her and about, she had taught piano and she had a piano in the corner and, got talking about that and talking about all the things she'd seen on that farm and just the stories of this person who had grown up at the end of that road in that farmhouse and talked about the different types of snow where when it gets cold enough, you can walk on the crust, but then something happens and suddenly you can't anymore. And what it was like, seeing the changes over the years and decades in that place that as far as she knows, she wasn't going to be able to enjoy for the rest of her life. But suddenly, as a result of the work that we're able to do with this funding, she's able to age in place, live independently, stay there in that place that had been part of her home her entire life. And that was something that just really stuck with me as that human side of this work. And you can't measure that with the dollars and the kilowatt hours and things like that. Another story that really gets to some of these nuance we see is we worked on a home in a different part of central Vermont, and I knew that there was a person who was not happy with the end of the work because of an alleged situation with construction mess. Their husband had COPD, and they were worried that the dust that had been left was going to exacerbate his health condition. And so I took this extremely seriously, and I was a little upset to hear this. And you always take it with a grain of salt, but I immediately went over there to check it out. And I walked into the home. and it looked like the most sparkling example of just like the cleanest, most perfect home you could imagine. And as far as I could tell, there had been a perception that there was a mess that, in fact, the discerning person couldn't really see. And so you could just leave it there and say, okay, that's it. We did our thing. It's clean. The end. There's nothing else to do here. But, just extended the benefit of the doubt and said, okay, we're sorry. We'll make this right. Hired a cleaning person, had them come in, vigorously clean invisible dust that nobody else could see, talk to this person for a few hours. And that turned it over to the situation where instead of being irate and just really worried about their husband's health and all these other things, let us know the constellations of things that have been going on for them and the other supports they can maybe benefit from and the things that were going on globally in their life, and shifted from really being amplified and really in an extreme state to suddenly feeling like connected to other supports and able to talk about what's going on in a way that seemed like they were going to connect us in other supports. And that maybe seems like a little thing. It doesn't have a lot to do with weatherization, but it's the difference between just running a business where you say, the contract says this, here's the scope of work, we did it, if you don't like it, go do whatever, to say, no, we're going to really make sure we understand all of what's going on for you and really try to get your needs met in a way that is going to make sure that you're okay when we're done. So there are so many non-business aspects of the work that we do every day around Vermont. A final story that I'll tell you on that front is in the town that I live in, which is Northfield, Vermont. We had a crew that was working on a home there, right in the downtown border there. And I went to do another visit to see how it was going over there. And it was a huge house. And they let me know that they thought they might be going to set the record for the most cellulose insulation that we'd ever used in any home. And I tried to understand why that was. And they said it was because when they got there, in that home and all of the walls and all of the attic and any part of that entire home, there was no insulation when they started. Zero. Heat just pouring out and pouring out and pouring out. And we were going to be there for a week. And at this point, they were only there on the second day. And that morning, they had told me the story that just stuck with me. And I don't think I'll ever forget, where the kids came into the kitchen and they said, Mom, why is it warm here? It's never been warm here. How can this be? And so those kids had shifted from a situation where, as far as they knew, their house was just not ever going to be warm. We're halfway through our job, or we weren't even close to being done. Suddenly it was a warm place for them to live. And you think about that experience for a kid growing up, being cold, being the place that isn't really fit for human habitation, just shifting to, here's the kitchen, it's cozy, that I can go in and have a normal childhood experience. So that to me is just so much more important in my own thinking to how tall the measuring tape might be on the wall of the very auditorium. That said, we're going to pass it over to Wendy for some more testimonials for our clients.
So one from Sevka Weatherization. For those of you who have lived in an old drafty New England home, you will understand my newfound happiness. I found out about the Windham County Weatherization Program from Sevka only a year ago and applied. My home is a 200-year-old large and uninsulated building that would take several cords of wood, wood pellets, propane, and a heat pump to the tune of $4,000 each winter to keep it to a miserable 59-degree temperature and never any higher. I've personally lived through 7 winters, and although you do get used to it, not only does it leave you always cold with many layers on and gloves at all times, it creates an unsettling feeling within that life is not supposed to be this way in my 60s. All that has changed in just 2 weeks since the Sevka Weatherization team planned out the work, did the necessary tests, and went to work. From the moment they arrived, I was greeted with friendly faces, eager to make my home as comfortable as it could possibly be. They even were well aware of my pets, made fast friends with them, and made sure they stayed safe during the 7-day process. My home was a challenge for the crew, but each roadblock they hit, they came together to solve the problem and continued on. They found additional spaces to insulate and filled every nook and cranny they found. Their work was also very aesthetically pleasing and professional looking. Afterward, my house attained a 42% improvement, which I can already feel around me. When the team arrived, they came as workers and left as friends. I cannot thank each and every one of them enough in their profound desire to make my house a home. That was from Ann Smith in Westminster. And I think one of the important parts of that story is the training that the people who went into the home have to identify everything, right? It's not just that there's this highly trained energy auditor who makes a plan. It's that our crews are also exceptionally talented. They know what they're doing, and they go in and they make the changes necessary to make the homes livable. We also have another testimony that said it can take a village. Hi all, you who helped me beat the weather, the crisis fuel utilities specialists at CVOEO, the heating contractor, installers of the system, all the folks from the Champlain Valley Weatherization Service, the case manager at AgeWell, and the housing retention specialist at Burlington Housing Authority. Last week, my new heating and water system achieved peak performance, and I am liberated from fear of winter. It's 70 degrees steady here. It doesn't make a sound. It takes up no space mounted on a wall, and honestly, it's really something to see. I am safer now. Happy to report another enormous benefit. For the first time in 30 years, I can get through a shower without running out of hot water. Cannot tell you how happy that makes me. So you've all changed my life so much for the better. I want you to know that. I thank you all. Your friend forever. The crisis fuel is a little bit different service also, but part of the weatherization family of services.
So we've talked about stacking a lot of wins, and there really are a lot. We're talking about having livable wages and a career ladder for a workforce that can start entry level and grow into really kind of a fine career over the course of their life. We've talked about having a local economy amplified by hiring many, many small business owners out in the world, using local materials to the greatest extent possible, circulating over $5 million a year just on the subcontracting aspects of this, allowing older Vermonters to age in place and live independently, creating a better environment for children to live in, helping our most, the people living in the deepest poverty with the most vulnerabilities access the supports and services that they need. And of course, there's a cost associated with that. Yeah. And this is something we talk about a lot. What is the cost of this? Is it too much? We heard earlier that it's around $15,000 a unit. I would argue that this is just an incredible stacking of wins that is very strategic to not just maintain at its current level, but think about amplifying to extend those rippling effects across that economy and to make more of the homes that we know are substandard, livable, energy efficient, affordable. Of course, we need to build as much new housing as possible, energy efficient, quality, good, safe, accessible housing. Absolutely, that needs to happen yesterday. And at the same time, we know that for so many thousands of Vermonters, that is out of reach. The ceiling code, the base code that we're hearing in terms of what is the cost of new construction. We talked to builders today, getting under $350 a square foot is pretty difficult to do right now for anybody in terms of building a new home. And if you think about what that really translates to for a new home of the size that we typically see in Vermont, maybe 2,000 square feet, maybe $700,000. 15 grand for weatherization and air sealing is 2% of that budget. So on the one hand, it's a big number, but in the scheme of things, it's nominal compared to what we're looking at building a home. That's not talking about permanent affordability, which we see in affordable housing, which also is critically needed. I will argue for more of that every day that I can. We know that that base is about $600,000 per unit of new affordable housing in Vermont. So again, this investment is something like 15 grand per unit that multiplies in all of these ways across the economy and living independently and all of these things. It's a tremendously valuable investment. That said, we're looking at a 50% cut in our base funding for weatherization across the network in FY29, beginning with something like a 4% cut in FY27. There had been an attempt to stave that off with the Clean Heat Standard, which you may have heard something about in this building. That said, we need a new mechanism to stop that from happening. And we also don't know what to expect coming from the Federal Department of Energy. And we're definitely hoping that some of the strategic thinking you do in this building is around this idea of how to not just maintain that funding we have in place, but ultimately how to further leverage that to compound those benefits in the community to the greatest extent possible. Happy to submit to any questions or interrogations you may have at this time.
Well, did you say 4% in FY27 and 50% in FY28? Or did I get the years wrong?
We're anticipating a 50% cut in 29 as of now.
So as of July 1, 28. Questions for Will? That was great testimony.
I'd also have to let you know that we have a network across the state of people that would have loved to be involved too, that are running incredible programs. And, you know, we've got Wendy from Hedi who's running an amazing program. Also know that this happens with Brock and SEPCA and CBOEO, every region of the state. This is happening, not just Capstone and anything.
Yeah, and I think that the funding conversation is a really important one. So, yeah, Rep Tori, and then not sure who else. Okay, Rep Bailey and Tori.
Thank you so much for the great news. I'm curious about how deep your waiting list is
Yeah.
and how much kind of progress are you making?
Yeah, it really is variable based on the region. We find that to go from the process of you've applied and then we actually have a truck showing up and working in your home, if you are eligible, is typically 6 month-ish to complete that process if we don't find hazardous material in your home. And one of the things that will make that be a very long wait is if we do find vermiculite. Unfortunately, there's a lot of that going on. So we have a file in our own weatherization room right now in our office of about 65 homes that are totally eligible, have gone through the process, and are literally just waiting for new funding to be available to do vermiculite abatement, which is something like $20,000 per home where we discovered that. For a very long time in Vermont, it was seen as a choice. Insulation, just fill everything you can with vermiculite. Unfortunately, we now know that it's not safe for humans, so that's a real issue. But it's variable, and typically we can do in our own organization something like 230 homes a year on a single family, and then closer to 400 on the multifamily. Yeah.
I'd like to point out as well, where we're looking at that wait list, the federal government requires us to use what's called a WAP rank to put people onto the list. So if you're elderly, you have a higher number, you're going to be higher up on the list. Disabled, the number of children, those sorts of things. The lower the income, the higher you are on the list. But we advertise a very generous range of income eligibility that is Vermont is. I cannot stress how much I appreciate being in this industry in Vermont. We are so fortunate that the state has helped so much to allow us to help more people. But when it comes to funding sources, that the little guides that you see on the website, a lot of that is 100% dependent on Vermont funds because the restrictions are much heavier on federal funding, the ones that we have currently. It should open up a little bit more if executive orders don't happen and IRA funding comes through as planned. But when we look at those wait lists, depending on the region, I say I'm fortunate that the Northeast Kingdom is very low income, right? We're the three poorest counties in the state. So we don't have trouble finding people who qualify for federal funds. But I know sometimes in Southern Vermont and for CBOEO's region as well, when the funding from the federal government is very restrictive on that low level income, they don't have as many people who can qualify. So the wait lists for the higher income bracket can be a lot longer because we have limited funds that can service that portion of the population. So the funding sources that we're currently braiding are very complex. There's more than there's ever been. Again, very fortunate. I've got two people at my company who've been here for more than 35 years. So they know what it was like way back in the day when people would apply for weatherization and just get a roll of plastic and they'd say, okay, go. And that was the extent of it. It's a lot more complicated now, but those wait lists, a lot of it depends on the funding. It's the quality of the home, the money that we have available to remediate things like vermiculite, roofs that need to be repaired so that we're not blowing insulation that's just going to be rained on, those sorts of things. That extra to get the houses ready will extend your time on the wait list, but also the flexibility that we have with the funding available to our organizations. I just want to point that out. So some people who are at the higher end of the spectrum are going to be on that wait list for a lot longer as well.
Who was next?
I don't have.
Okay, Rep Howard.
Do you ever have any asbestos mitigation in your?
It's not as common as vermiculite, but it does happen. Yeah, similar. We'd have one of the pinch points in the system in Vermont is just the shortage of abatement entities able to handle either vermiculite or asbestos. There's only a handful of them, and subsequently the costs are very high, and there can be wait times there. So yes, asbestos comes up from time to time, but much less frequently than vermiculite.
And both processes are sealing.
In the case of vermiculite, it is a removal typically that happens. There's some exceptions of ways that you can do an encapsulation approach. But with asbestos, it's more often sealing. Thank you. Sure.
Other questions? All right. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us. That was, yeah, sorry, we started a little bit late. That was really helpful.
Yeah, my pleasure. And of
So-
course, reach out anytime if you have more questions.
Below us an answer.
About which thing?
How deep is the?
Oh, yeah, I gotta come back with
What's
Barry
the
Auditorium.
square footage?
Yeah.
Well, tell me what
Yeah.
the square footage of the Barry Auditorium is.
I have to get all this together for you. I'll come back with it. Yeah,
Well, I can tell you
Cool.
13,000.
nice.
262 cubic feet.
I asked Joe Oliver to work on this, our fire guy over at Barry Auditorium, so I'll have to follow up with him and let you know. Yeah.
We eagerly await.
100%.
So thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All the best. Have a good rest of your day.
All right.
So,
Okay, we can go
Thank
up.
you very much.
0.44.
Thank you.
Hey, you guys,
It's 150.
Scott,
You-
Scott,
Still
did you have a
on live.
question?
Still on live.
not a question.